boys and girls. Yesterday we stopped reading at the end of chapter 5 of the Parker Inheritance, and we were waiting to see what Candace and Brandon found in the attic. So I hope you're still thinking about the predictions that you made for what they might find, and we are going to start on chapter 6. Candace poked her head into her mother's office to tell her what they were up to. "Be careful up there," her mother said. Any trace of anger toward Candace from before had disappeared. "This house has been boarded up for months. There's no telling what you could find." The entrance to the attic was in the garage. Candace was already sweating by the time she pulled down the ceiling door. Brandon flipped on the light, and they headed up the rickety stairs. The wooden slats groaned beneath them. The attic was even hotter than the garage. There looked to be nothing but junk up there. Old Christmas decorations, a sewing machine, and spools of dated cloth. "Yuck," Brandon said, wiping at his face. "I just got spider web in my mouth." Laughing, Candace walked over to the far corner of the room. Then she smiled. "Over here," she said to Brandon. There against the wall was a box labeled "For Candace." She had slid the box top off by the time Brandon reached her. At first, all they found inside were textbooks, dictionaries, and old encyclopedias. "Not quite the new reading I was hoping for," Brandon said. They continued pulling book after book out of the box, but nothing seemed remotely interesting to Candace. Brandon had stopped to page through a book on Greek mythology. "This isn't that bad," he said. "Can I borrow it?" "Fine by me," Candace said as she removed the last textbook. And that's when she saw the puzzle book. Candace recognized it immediately. It was a thick paperback full of logic games and brain teasers that she'd solved years ago. She brought the book to her nose. Maybe it was her imagination, but she thought she smelled traces of lavender. She cracked open the book, and an envelope slid out and floated to the ground. Candace picked up the letter, thinking it was an old piece of mail that had been used as a bookmark long ago. She flipped it over, looking for an address. Instead, she found a small note. "Find the path, solve the puzzle." It was her grandmother's handwriting. Swirling loops in dark blue ink, the words reminded Candace of what her grandmother used to always say. "Just because you don't see the path doesn't mean it's not there." Candace wiped her hands. They were sweaty and shaking. The note felt like a message from beyond the grave. She stole a peek at Brandon. He was still looking at the mythology book. She quickly returned to the letter in the puzzle book. "We should head downstairs," she said. "We're going to melt if we stay up here much longer." He nodded. "Sure thing. But what about these other books?" "Don't worry about them," he said. She said, standing. "I'll come back later and box them up." He shrugged, but followed her downstairs. Once they reached the living room, Brandon peeked out the window. "Shoot, they're back." He smiled timidly at her. "Do you mind if I hang out here for a few minutes? I promise I won't bother you." "Sure, no problem," she said, walking toward the kitchen, the puzzle book tight in her hands. "I'll, be back in a second." She sat down at the table and cracked open the book. Then she read the note on the envelope again. Yep, she was sure of it. It was her grandmother's handwriting. Since the envelope wasn't sealed, Candace decided there was no harm in seeing what was inside. It was only after she unfolded the sheet of paper that she hesitated. The letter was addressed to her grandmother, and it seemed intrusive to read it, but she almost returned the envelope. Almost. She was a reader, she reminded herself. Readers read. And so, Candace read the letter. August 10th, 2007. Dear Miss Caldwell, I write to you on behalf of the Washington family. I'm sure you've never met them. How could you? The Allen boys ran them out of Lambert long before you arrived in the city. And when the Washingtons appealed for justice, city officials denied them at every turn. Enoch, Leanne, and Siobhan Washington became the newest victims of the city's long-standing discrimination against black people. I loved Siobhan, and that is why I spent 30 years destroying the Allens step by step. My first strike was physical, and then I wrecked them financially. I was the majority owner of corporations that bought out the Allen textiles. I purchased Solera Industries simply so I could move their plant out of Lambert, ruining the Allens' land lease. My goal was to wreak havoc not only on the Allens, but the entire city. It seemed fitting. But Siobhan Washington still cared for Lambert. She asked me to show compassion. Unlike her father, unlike me, she believed in the balance of justice and forgiveness. and even now, 7 years after her death, I cannot deny her. Thus I have created an opportunity for Lambert to earn back everything I took from the city, a fortune totaling $40 million at my last reckoning. I've created a puzzle mystery that will take you deep into the city's past. The person who finds this inheritance will receive 1/10 of the money. The remainder will be allocated to the city. In return, the winner must share what he or she learns through the puzzle with the world. Your first clue. Number 1. Siobhan's father loved tennis, but he grew up idolizing a team in another sport. I wish you had a chance to meet Siobhan and her parents. Siobhan was amazing, but her mother was too. Leanne Washington's days as a volunteer at her church did more for Lambert's children than most people will ever know. Like her mother, Siobhan believed in giving people second chances, or in my case, 3. She was truly greater than the sum of her parts. Beautiful, smart, educated, compassionate. She loved laughter and literature and math. She was beauty personified on the tennis courts, easily talented enough to thrive on a collegiate and national level. But because she loved me more, she chose to give it up. She was everything a poor, simple boy like me could hope for. She loved all, black, white, rich, poor. She loved Lambert, despite what it did to her and her father. She loved me, even after I became a ghost of my former self. Here lies your challenge. Siobhan is the key, the one who will lead you to my fortune. She is the only reason you are getting this opportunity. Do not squander it. I have sent similar versions of this letter to the mayor, the school district superintendent, the chair of the school board, and the editor of the Lambert Trader. Your precedents failed to protect the Washington family, at great cost. This is your chance to make right what once went so utterly wrong. This is your chance to create a better world for your grandchild. But do not delay. These clues, like Siobhan, will not be of this world forever. Hoping to find another page, Candace looked in the envelope. But it was empty. That was all there was to the letter. Who had written it? Why had he left it unsigned? And what was it still doing in her grandmother's attic? Candace placed the letter on the table, then wiped her hands that were still clammy and sweaty on her jeans. She had never heard of Enoch or Leon Washington, nor had she heard of Siobhan, whose name she pronounced in her head as Siobhan. All she knew was that Enoch Washington and his family were black, and the Allens were rich and powerful and white. When she had told her friends she was moving to Lambert for the summer, a city in the deep south, barely a fifth the size of Atlanta, Dee Dee had genuinely worried for Candace and her mom. She worried they'd be attacked by men in white robes on horseback. Candace's father, who was supposed to be chauffeuring the girls to the mall and not listening to them, quickly jumped in the conversation, telling them they didn't need to worry about the Ku Klux Klan, especially in a progressive city like Lambert. Candace didn't exactly believe her father, but she also didn't know enough about the city to disagree with him, even if Lambert was progressive now. Could her father say the same about the city when the Washingtons lived there, whoever they were? She ran her thumb over her grandmother's handwritten words. Find the path. Solve the puzzle. What if her grandmother hadn't made a mistake? What if there was a treasure? What if her grandmother had put the letter there on purpose? For her. Chapter 7. For the next 30 minutes, Candace stared at the letter. The letter stared back. The paper was stiff, stale, brittle, like peanut butter cookies that had been left out for too long. The letter, with its small, black, single-spaced words and yellow edges, spoke of a mystery. She knew she couldn't tell her mother about it. Not yet. Not if it had anything to do with her grandmother getting fired. But then again, how could she not talk to her mom about it? Candace thought about all the puzzle books and logic games her grandmother used to buy for her, including the one that she had found the note in the attic. Had Grandma been preparing her for this all along? The letter also spoke of an opportunity, an inheritance, a fortune, enough for them to keep their house, enough to stop them from moving. She looked up when she heard footsteps approaching. Brandon cautiously crept into the kitchen, his huge backpack on his shoulders. Hey, Candace? I didn't know what happened to you. I wanted to let you know I was about to leave. He held up the mythology book. I'll bring this back in a few days. Oh, yeah, sure. She looked down at the letter, then glanced at Brandon. Okay, this is going to sound a little strange, but have you ever heard of Enoch, Leanne, or Siobhan Washington? Or maybe the Allen family? Brandon tilted his head at her pronunciation. Siobhan? Can you spell that? She looked down at the letter. Siobhan. Oh, he said after a second. I think it's pronounced Siobhan. Candace scowled at herself. Brandon was right. A character in one of her mom's books had the same name. The only reason I know is because a girl named Siobhan used to babysit us, he continued. But no, I haven't heard of her. Who are the other people again? She repeated the names. The Washingtons lived here a long time ago, she said, tracing the edges of the paper, and the Allens used to be really rich. Brandon sat down beside her at the table, his backpack still on his shoulders. Did you see that empty lot across from the library, the one filled with masonry bricks? She shook her head. I don't remember it. Well, that was supposed to be the new library, Brandon said. They were going to name it after Russell Allen. I think he was a big-time businessman around here. Then, according to one of the librarians, some rich guy paid the county not to open the Allen Library. He gave them a bunch of money to rehab and expand the existing building instead. Candace glanced at the letter. Whoever had written it had wanted to destroy the Allens. Could he have been behind the donations to the library? Do you know the name of the guy who gave the money for the renovations? She asked. No, but maybe we could ask one of the librarians, or maybe my granddad knows. Candace didn't reply for a few minutes. She was thinking through the letter, trying to make connections among the library, the Allens, the Washingtons, and her grandmother. It was all too murky. And I'm going to stop right there, because we're running out of time. And I'm going to challenge you to go back to the part where I read the letter that Candace found in the attic, and think about all the different clues that were in the letter. And as we read the book, make some predictions about what those clues mean and how Candace and Brandon might come to solve the puzzle. And we'll read again tomorrow.